We're so excited to start a new season for the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra, and it's great to see friends and familiar faces and new faces here as well. As Kelly said, this is our 60th anniversary season for the orchestra, and we have a wonderful concert schedule, a theme of the elements, as well as staged opera at the end. We're also going to be interspersing a few pieces from earlier years of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra throughout the season. So each of the classics concerts, including the opera, is something that we've performed in our first 10th, 20th, 30th, 40th, or 50th season. So recognize where we've been and to look ahead and excited to where we're going. Before we get into a description of the concert this weekend, I want to take a moment to recognize our concert sponsor and guest artist sponsor, Cottingham & Butler. And since I've been here, and this is now my 19th season, they have always been the sponsor of our first classics concert for opening night, and we're so grateful to them for their support. John and Alice couldn't be here tonight, but we are lucky to have a representative of Cottingham & Butler, also a Dubuque Symphony Orchestra board member and executive committee member, John Link, and his wife Lauren are here. Please welcome and thank them. We really appreciate your support. Thank you very much. So let's see, a lot to talk about. Hard to know where to begin. I might forget this, so I'm going to say this right at the top. Tonight we have an open rehearsal. If you or anybody you know would be interested in coming to see us work on the program and see an actual working rehearsal of the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra, we welcome you to come to Five Flags Theater through the front doors, and just make sure to be there by 6:45, 6:40 at the latest. And then the rehearsal starts at 7. There'll be a break at around 8:30. You could stay and visit with folks then, or you could leave, or you could stay all the way to the rehearsal end at 10. But that would be for those diehards. One of the other things we're doing this year to celebrate, and also to sort of really to tie in with the theme of the elements, is we have a wonderful slideshow that is going to accompany the one piece or a couple pieces of music, perhaps, for each of the classics concerts. So for this weekend, it's going to be accompanying the Copland Tenderland suite that we're doing. And the slideshow is made up of photographs contributed by you and other people from the community. So it's a really wonderful way to include people. And a way to show our love of these elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And if you're interested in submitting some photographs for, now it's too late for tomorrow, of course, but if you're interested in submitting photographs for the air, fire, or water programs that we have, I would ask you to email some photographs to our Director of Marketing, Kathleen Hooper, who's right here. Kathleen, I want to recognize for doing an outstanding job with the slideshow, putting it all together, so thank you. So. Another way I feel that this concert this weekend is sort of a celebration is that we get to welcome back a true favorite, guest artist who's been here many times and who many people have just enjoyed his musicianship as well as his personality. We have Gareth Johnson back in Dubuque. We're so excited. We'll be hearing from Gareth quite a bit here in just a little bit. I told him I'm going to talk about the other two pieces quickly because they really want to hear about you. Well, when I was programming this concert thinking about the earth, there are a lot of pieces of music that composers have written that have been inspired by the earth. I mean, there have been many that are very pictorial or kind of programmatic, if you will. The Grand Canyon Suite or the Havana's Mysterious Mountain. There are so many pieces to pick from. But how I ended up on this particular program that we're performing this weekend is that I wanted to pick music that not just celebrates the earth and maybe depicts it slightly, but music that really talks about our love of the earth. And when I thought about that, I thought, well, what composer's music really moves me about the earth? And two composers immediately came to mind, Beethoven and Copland. And Copland's music, like Appalachian Spring and Billy the Kid and Rodeo, and those pieces to me, they sort of speak to not just the landscape, but our connection to it. And so I wanted to do some Copland, and I wanted to try maybe something different and new with the orchestra, so I thought we would start with, how appropriate, The Tender Land. And The Tender Land was his only full-length opera. And unfortunately, it was not a very successful opera. And that's partially because he and the librettist thought of the opera and originated it as an idea for an opera to be produced on television. So they wrote it with that in mind, that it would be, that the scenes would be up close, that the drama would be at an intimate, sort of personal level. So they didn't actually really conceive it for a grand opera stage or an opera house. But yet, when it was first produced in New York City on a stage of the New York City Opera in 1958, that kind of production in that large space didn't serve the story or the music very well, because it really is an intimate story about a young woman coming of age, growing up on a farm in rural America in the 1930s. It's about her falling in love and her ultimate liberation, and not ending up with the man she loves, but deciding to strike out on her own. It was actually quite feminist for its time. And unfortunately, the reviewers and the critics just completely decimated it. They had such high hopes that Copland, who had already established himself as a really great composer at that point, they had high hopes for some kind of, maybe a grand opera, something with pageantry, something that you would expect at an opera house. This was very different. This was, as I've been telling the orchestra at our rehearsals this week, it's music that you have to play with heart. It's just so heartfelt. It's very sincere music. And there isn't necessarily overt depictions of the earth in here, but this piece and the whole thing is really about the sort of life that we live in the Midwest. And so it has this wonderful kind of connection to us. Because I really want our exploration of these elements together to not just be about thinking about earth, air, fire, and water. It's about our connections to those, how we are all of those things. In our bodies and in our minds, that they are part of us. Those aspects are part of everything. And it's just amazing how composers over the years have been inspired by those elements. As you can see from the programming of the season, I went to town on some of the fire and water and other kinds of elements here. It's going to be quite a fun season. I'll play you a little bit of the Copland. There's a part toward the end called The Promise of Living. And it's, I think, one of the most beautiful things that he wrote. Like the way near the end of Appalachian Spring, his well-known and well-loved ballet, he incorporates a shaker tune called Simple Gifts and builds on that. He incorporates a sort of that hymn of Zion's Walls, and he sort of has a little bit of a reference to it, and builds a sort of set of recurring variations like he did with Simple Gifts. And it's just a loving tribute to life, the promise of living. Here's a little bit of that. Let's see if I can get this to work. Simple, isn't it? It's sort of like he took that message of the gift to be simple and really he took that to heart. Don't forget, this is a composer trained in the avant-garde in Paris in the 1920s. Then he came back to this country, tried to write fiercely modernistic music, and it wasn't until the Depression that he realized, no, he needed to write music for the masses. He needed to make his music accessible to people. He needed to write music to lift people's mood in the Depression. And so he decided to write more for the people than for the sophisticated elite, the sort of music critics and so forth. And he kept to that. He had different sides to it, but even as late as this piece in the 1950s, he was still writing in that vernacular in some ways. this before. It's been sung in the opera. It's actually a vocal quintet. Oftentimes it's done by choruses. The words are very beautiful, The Promise of Living. Interesting note, the librettist actually was a close friend of his. He was not trained as a librettist. The librettist was actually his lover, and he was a dancer by trade. And so they worked very closely together on this. I don't think he was maybe a former, so I don't think they were together still at that time, but they were very close friends, and they worked very closely together on this. And it was unfortunate that it was panned so harshly when it first premiered. Copland was ready to walk away and say, it's a flop. He actually left New York. He said that was an excuse for me to leave. And he left New York for quite some time, almost like he couldn't show his face. It's been hard. Now we hear this and we think, how beautiful. I'd love to hear this whole opera. This is fantastic. What is this opera of Copland that we don't know? Well, I hope that you go away from the concert feeling that as well. That moment of the Promise of Living is the end of the suite. The earlier sections are a little bit more tumultuous. You know, it's like the Promise of Living is sort of the moment that we've been waiting for. There's a wild party scene in the music, and then there's the love music as well. It's a wonderful suite, and I'm so glad that he did create the suite, because he was, as I said, ready to turn his back on the music and the opera completely. But maybe he decided, okay, well, maybe if I create a concert suite, maybe it will help the opera be more better known, and the people will understand the music from it. And yeah, it's rarely performed, although I was just told that I guess the Des Moines Metro Opera did it this past summer in a cornfield. And it sold out immediately. And it's very well received. I wish Copland were still alive to witness that. That would have been fantastic. I wish I would have witnessed that. I missed out on that. Yeah. As I mentioned before, when I said the two composers that come to mind when I think about love of the earth in music were Beethoven and Copland. And for Beethoven, it's this, among other things, his Sixth Symphony for sure is one of those. The Pastorale Symphony is so special in so many ways. And this piece, it's so interesting to think of it being written at the same time as the Fifth Symphony. I mean, they were really written and premiered the same exact time, the premiere on the same night. It's so much so that the Fifth could have been the Sixth, and the Sixth could have been the Fifth. But what's so interesting about that is that the Fifth Symphony is so different. It's almost as if two sides of him were writing, and you know, when he was maybe writing the Fifth Symphony, it was so intense and dramatic and powerful and terse and short. And then he decided to write something that was more relaxed and spacious and less intensely dramatic. And dramatic, yes, but in a different kind of way. And you know, the Fifth Symphony is, for the fact that it clearly tells a musical story from struggle to triumph, it still is abstract music. There are no titles to the movements. There's no clearly defined story or program that Beethoven has given us. We create the story. It's abstract and it's somewhat infinite in that way. But with the Sixth Symphony, for the first time, a symphony has these titles. He gave it the title of the Pastorale. You know, a lot of times symphonies have titles. But a lot of times those titles weren't given by the composers. They were given by publishers or other people over the years. But this is a case that he gave the title Pastorale. And he said it's supposed to be a remembrance of country life. And then he gave specific titles to each movement, which was unheard of at the time. And it's so revolutionary. He expanded the traditional 4-movement model of a symphony to 5 movements to accommodate this sort of story that he's telling as well. And he has purposely written in a kind of less sophisticated style. There's something kind of purposely simplistic, in a way very Copland-like, about the way he writes. When you just listen to the opening of the first movement, it's hard to believe that this is the same Beethoven who, you know, has written some of the most complex music that the early Romantic age ever experienced. Let's hear, I've got a couple of different recordings here. Let's hear this one. hooves, taking his carriage out to the woods in Baden or Mödling or one of those places he liked to go outside of Vienna. Like drones. We have a lot of these like country drones and basses. It's important to remember that Beethoven was experimenting with depicting things in nature slightly, and he knew that this was a dangerous road to go down. So he said that this is not supposed to be painting pictures of country life, even though somewhat he does. He said this is supposed to be an expression of the feelings that we have when we're in the country. So in other words, it's not just nature, it's us in nature, and it's our feelings. It's about emotions and feelings. And the first movement, the awakening the cheerful feelings when you arrive into the country. And that's that first movement, that's that feeling, there's almost that expectation. A moment of hesitation when the music sort of hesitates and stops for a split second right at the beginning. If you hear that, and you realize, oh yeah, that happens in the Fifth Symphony too, but in a different way. Ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum. It's very unusual for a piece of music to start and immediately stop like that and hold a note. But he does that, and he does that in such a different, amazing way here with the Sixth Symphony. Here it is again. Oh yeah. It's so great. There's so much also of Beethoven's sense of humor in this too. If you listen to carefully in the third movement, that's supposed to be the merry gathering of the country folk, the first really depiction of the people that might be in the country, besides us and our feelings that have been kind of there ever since the beginning of the first movement. The third movement has this moment where there's the second bassoon player gets to play these low notes in a crude country band kind of style. I'll just try to find that for you. First, a little bit of the beginning of that movement. Again, he has melodies that are purposely less sophisticated than what he might write otherwise. Go on, and eventually we'll hear the sound of hunting horns, quite dramatic hunting horns. Let's see if I can find that. Oh, well, this is the part I was talking about with the, just a second, this is the part I wanted to play that second bassoon. It's just an example of, Beethoven's little sense of humor in there. Back up and play it for you. So those hunting horns I was telling you about. So you'll hear an oboe solo. Listen carefully for the notes in the bassoon out here. Boom, 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 boom. It's said that he would go to this little country tavern, and he wrote some music for the country band musicians there. And so this is sort of a little tribute to his friends who are not as trained in the fancy, sophisticated music that he would normally play for the princes and things in Vienna. But yeah, it's a little bit of that. The second movement is such a special movement. It's really kind of like the heart of this symphony. It's the scene by the brook. In terms of descriptive titles, that one's kind of lacking a little bit. But that one, there's so much to it there. You have the water rustling in the strings, and there's a very sort of adventurous and unusual, for the time, completely a unique scoring in the strings with two solo cellos muted, and second violins muted, and violas unmuted, that play the opening that sort of depict the sort of water rustling here in the second movement. And here's a little bit of that. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong movement here. Let's see if I can find it. That's not the first. that swaying accompaniment will eventually gather a little bit more momentum, and it's really as if it's supposed to be the water in the brook, kind of just sort of trickling over the rocks. It's so beautiful. Just that shimmering. It's almost like such a perfect musical description of sunlight coming through, too. There are these different voices, different personalities coming through with the melody. Now we have the clarinet bassoon on top of that rustling. And before it was the violins, then it'll be the oboe, and then the flute. There's such a different feeling in this symphony compared to not just the Fifth, which was written at the same time, but almost any other Beethoven piece. There's such a relaxed atmosphere here. You don't want to rush it, you know? And there's something about it that I think even that in my earlier interpretations as a younger conductor, I kind of missed the boat on because I was kind of like trying to like maybe get to the good stuff or something like that. You know, this is the good stuff. Let's savor. We don't want this beautiful day to end. It's a beautiful day that he's giving us in music, in musical terms. And there's moments where he uses these special harmonies, and I'm not going to get too technical about it, but he uses harmonies that either evoke a change that's in nature that doesn't happen with man because it's not a regular sort of harmony that sort of seems more human, or he uses a harmony that we have all for centuries associated with the church to make it seem sort of holy or sacred. And that's actually really kind of what he felt about Mother Nature. He said in one of his letters that nobody loves nature as much as me. That's what he says. Nobody loves nature as much as me. I can't go a day without being in like the woods, and whenever I'm there, he says, the trees, the stones, the brook, the water, everything seems to be saying, holy, holy, holy. Isn't that beautiful? That's how he felt about the earth. And you can hear that in this piece. In fact, near the very end of the last movement, after the end of a movement that's been all about giving thanks, and not just for surviving the storm that had just preceded it, but giving thanks for life, giving thanks for the earth. It's a beautiful song of thanksgiving, this last movement. But near the very end of it, there's this beautiful moment where the strings do a prayer, literally, a very quiet prayer. It's an inward moment. In fact, it's marked musically, it's marked sottovoce, under voice. It's not supposed to be played with sort of your full sound. It's supposed to be played with sort of like not quite your full sound because it's that intimate prayer moment. And if you don't know it's coming and you're not aware of it, you might miss it. But it's such a special moment. And I'm not sure if I should play it for you because it's out of context, you might not get it. You have to kind of experience it, and then you get to that moment, and it's just fantastic. Right before that, actually, is my favorite part of the whole symphony, which is a moment where the excitement and energy of thanks and gratitude builds to such a level that it just sort of overflows. There's this moment where there's this gushing of joy of life. Thank you for being alive. Thank you for this earth. Thank you for all of the experiences. It's just, it's such a beautiful sort of early ode to joy before he wrote the ode to joy. That I might play for you. Because I don't want you to miss it. And it is, you might miss it otherwise. Let's see. Of course, I'm jumping around a bit. I haven't talked about the storm at all. I've talked about the bird calls at the end of the second movement. He writes in the score specifically, it's the nightingale, it's the quail, and it's the cuckoo bird. Interesting that we have two cuckoo birds on the program because we're going to have one in the seasons when we hear the summer. Yeah, this last movement, I'm just going to jump to this moment because I think, now, let me just make sure I'm in the right movement here. The movement starts with this shepherd call under these drone sounds in the strings. It's the signal saying that the storm is over, we're safe, it's okay. jump ahead to that moment I was talking about. I think it's maybe around here. Sorry, I have to jump ahead a little more. So fascinating the way he wrote this kind of finale for a symphony. He was fascinated with the idea of how do I end a symphony? And starting with the third symphony, he decided that maybe the ending is just as important as the first movement, because prior to that time, composers had put so much focus on the first movement, the opening movement of symphonies. And then the middle movements were like, oh, a lovely little slow movement and a lovely little dance movement. And then something really fast and exciting to make them stand up and clap at the end. And that's the kind of model that, granted, I don't want it to mean some of the masterful finales that Haydn and Mozart did. And one thinks of the finale of Jupiter Symphony of Mozart is definitely not a light little clapping piece, but still, there wasn't as much of a focus on the finale back then. So that was the tradition he inherited, and he wanted to maybe expand on that and change that. And so starting with the third symphony, and definitely with the fifth symphony, he has the finale movement be sort of like the culmination of what we've been building toward. He actually will sometimes quote earlier themes to make it integrated as a whole, which was kind of new at the time. And so we know that with the Fifth Symphony, the finale was such an important part because there's been this struggle and turmoil and drama that leads to triumph in the finale. With the Sixth Symphony, how do you end a symphony that is about our love of the earth and about a day in the country? How do you pack it up and go back into the city, so to speak, at the end of the day? And so it's really an interesting kind of puzzle of how he chose to end this with this song of thanksgiving, yes, and then right before the end, this prayer of super personal moment. And then what? I guess he just is going to have the shepherd's song kind of go off into the distance and just sort of end lightly. It doesn't fade out, but it doesn't have a big ending either. But somehow it wraps it all up, and the finale has a sort of weight about it, an importance to it, that you realize, yes, this is kind of what the earlier movements have all been leading toward. This is like his early Ode to Joy, like very much the way the Ode to Joy finale of the Ninth Symphony is what all those other earlier movements are leading toward. Now, the Storm movement is fantastic. I haven't talked about it at all. For the Storm, he brings in instruments that have been waiting to play for a long time, the piccolo, the trombones, and especially the timpani drums. Timpani can make great thunder, by the way. No thunder sheet, no wind machine. These things weren't invented back then in 1808. But the timpani is amazing for creating that sense of thunder. And he has little flickers of lightning even in the strings. And incredible effects with this storm, which is probably the most musically descriptive storm that had ever been written. And then inspired later storms by Rossini and Richard Strauss and Mendelssohn and many others. It's interesting, the use of instruments in this. I mentioned those instruments had to wait. Even the trumpets don't get to play for the first two movements. They finally come in the movement about the gathering of country folk. They're sort of like the signal of like the end of the merrymaking and so forth. But it's interesting that with limited musical means, of the limited orchestra, for the first two movements, it's just strings, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and horns. It's amazing the colors that he brings to it and the shades of this beautiful day. So it's a fantastic piece. So excited. And it's in many ways, it's a good way to start our exploration of the elements because it has earth, of course. It has water, the scene by the brook. It has lightning, so maybe it has fire. And it has these bird songs representing air. So a couple of little bird calls. So it really has them all. Well, as I said at the beginning, I am so thrilled to welcome back Gareth Johnson, our violin soloist for this weekend. He'll be performing the Spring and Summer Concertos by Vivaldi. Let's bring him up here and find out what they're doing. I told him I would bring him up here. Hopefully not too long, but yes, everybody wants to hear more from you. But I said it's gonna be hard for me not to gush about Copland. I gushed. Welcome back, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Yes. So now we were remembering that this is your 4th time performing with the Dubuque Symphony Orchestra.
Correct.
And it's been just so amazing to watch your musical growth and your career and personal side, also the developments and everything like that. I can't wait to share with our friends here what's been going on with you. So welcome back, and well, why don't you first tell us about, you're still based in Florida like you have been ever since we've known you.
Yes.
Tell us what you've been up to down there.
Okay.
Well, it's been an interesting few years, especially since I saw you all. I still continue to play classical concerts all over the country, all over the world when I can. I also started a family, so I have a 2-year-old daughter. Sort of the most magical thing about life, really, right now. Going through the terrific twos. And but we're having a great time down there.
Is your wife also a musician?
No, she's not a musician. She's a teacher.
Right. And she sometimes helps manage your
Yes, she helps manage me. She in every way. But yeah, we have a great life down there. But it's been about, of course, making a living as an artist for a family. So at first, my wife was like, I don't want to work. Okay, that's fine. So I had to make a living for the family, and as a violinist, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So I didn't go the traditional way of, I'm going to join this symphony orchestra, because I'll just be dead honest with everybody. I never liked playing in them. That's just not for me. It's something about my body posture. I can't sit right, and I'm just sitting there in pain the whole time.
Not only that, but your music making is so personal. And that's one of the hard things that an orchestra musician has to do, is sort of be part of a giant whole.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing. It's
Right.
a beautiful
It
thing
is.
to be part of something bigger than yourself. But you're an individual musician. I really feel it.
Well, I appreciate
Everybody who's
that.
heard you play knows that. I mean,
I appreciate that.
You light up the stage with your personality. And I can't imagine that being sort of subsumed into a section of violins.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry to just...
No. It goes even further than that, I feel, inside of myself with what wants to burst out. And I was just telling a couple of my new friends here how I have a hip-hop violin CD coming out in the next 3-4 months. You kind of think like, what is hip-hop violin? What are you gonna do? What's that sound like? You can't rap on the violin. So it's kind of my own genre, which I wanted to create, which other violinists have dabbled in a little bit, I feel, but no one's really just established a pure format for this genre of music, in my opinion. And this is where I feel one of my paths is really leading me to open this up. And as I was saying in my interview earlier, I work with kids a lot now too. I have a studio of about 20 private students. They pay nicely, but that's part of how I carry a family. And connecting the kids with the music has always been a part of my my goal in life. Even whenever I worked here with the Dubuque Arts Council.
Jan.
Yes, that's sort of what started and sparked my interest in this.
Really?
And from that, yeah, because I created a very nice presentation for the kids, trying to bridge the gap of unfamiliarity in classical music to what the kids like,
Yeah, contemporary music.
contemporary music.
When was that when you were in residence there? Would you guess it was like 6, 7, 8 years ago or something?
6 years
Well,
ago.
you did 2 residencies with us.
Yeah,
didn't
2
you?
Yes.
residencies with
So,
Yes.
yeah, I think the first, was it the first time you were here with your mother?
Oh, that might have been.
Yeah, the first one was, yes.
So however many years ago.
Yeah, that was almost 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But yes, so bridging that gap though, and this hip hop has been part of my, kind of the answer to all of that. Disney music, of course. I studied a lot of Disney music. Children love Disney music, but there's also a lot of classical music in Disney music. So there's some sort of connection there why every kid goes wild whenever I play Frozen. So I started to study these things. And I believe sometimes as classical musicians, and I hate to say it, but we get a little snooty with our own form of music, like, oh, well, that popular song by Bruno Mars, that's terrible. Why is he making $1 million? That's my question. Why? Well, if it's terrible, let's go create a few of them and then say it's terrible, then go back to what we're doing. But so these answers are sort of what I've been searching for. You know, it's not something that anyone wants to come forth and really say, but this is the truth as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I've started to merge classical, hip hop a little bit with pop. And I kind of think I've come up with a hip hop genre of violin. Now, I know this has nothing to do with Vivaldi. Was I supposed to talk about
We want to hear what's
Vivaldi?
going on.
Vivaldi was the rock star of his time. Okay? He made a living. I have to too. And so,
Well, I want to ask, what's a typical day like for you then? Because you do have like your foot in both worlds, like the classical world
yes.
and then this hip hop violin world. How do you manage it all with the teaching and family and everything like that too? Is there a typical structure that you have or routine for your day?
It's very, very bad and out there. It's very bad and unhealthy, I'd almost say. If I'm not teaching, practicing, or performing, then I'm creating.
That's great.
And trying to be a dad,
Yeah.
of course, trying to be a good dad, play, go to the park, do those little things. That's the most magical part of life, really, for me. But I have to make it so that she has a great life, so I have to constantly be creative in what I'm thinking about. And I'd almost say I'm probably one of the most artistic people you'll talk to right now. Because I didn't even know that there was a hurricane until yesterday.
He lives in Florida.
Yeah, and I live in Florida. I could have just been wiped out.
You just have like blinders on. You're all about the art and family.
Yeah, and family. And I'm trying to get things done quickly. I'm trying to finish up this CD. It's going to be done soon. And just in this process, I heard you talking about Beethoven, his fifth versus the sixth symphony, and the differences. And we have these periods of classical music, classical period, romantic. I almost look at Beethoven as his own period.
That's great.
Beethoven, he's his own, because
There are some super modern ones.
yeah, I mean, the late quartets are crazy, and if you, study his life, the Heiligenstadt Testament is whenever he came forth and said, like, look, I'm going deaf here. I am not going to be able to hear soon, but I'm going to still dedicate my life towards music and doing everything that I can. And didn't he compose the third symphony?
It was shortly after that. Yeah,
Shortly
it was
after
around
the
time
third.
of the second,
So-
the second and third. he
So
wrote
then the
that.
fifth and sixth, it was definitely, the hearing was
Oh, yeah.
gone. And so he had no influence. He had no influence in order to compose these pieces. And a lot of the time, composers get their material from the influence of what they hear around them. He had no influence. You have to imagine that, and that's why I almost call him his own his own period of music in a way. And right now, that's sort of how I feel in creating this slightly separate genre, which I'm trying to create, hip-hop violin, trying to do something that I haven't heard anything else like.
That's
So,
fantastic.
yeah, if you all would like, I wouldn't mind playing. Keep talking, right?
Yeah, here, I'll hold this and get your instrument out.
Okay.
I was asking Gareth last night at rehearsal, do you still have the same amazing instrument? He said, yeah. This is,
I'll tell about my instrument
Yeah.
too, because actually, the CD is going to be done on electric violin, not this violin. But this is a very, very special violin. And again, I was saying in the interview earlier, this is a Jean-Baptiste Villon violin. It's from 1840 in France. It's a beautiful violin, basically perfect condition. I searched for 3 or 4 years to find it. Found it at New York Rare Violins in Manhattan. And I actually came across a Villon at 12 years old. And I could have bought it for $60,000. And that just seemed outrageous to me. I started violin at 10 years old. By 11, I was doing Juilliard pre-college program courses, things like that. But by 12, I was looking into big violins, like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for my life. So let's spend some money. But of course, I didn't go that far yet. My parents got me one that was suitable for me at the time. But I did go back 10 years later. I found this violin in New York, and it was double the price. So at that point, it was around $145 or so. But now, 10 years later, I just had it appraised again, and it doubled again. So, hey, I like this thing. Really doing me nicely. But yeah, made in 1840, has a beautiful tone and amazing measurements. I actually found the violin that this was copied after recently. This was after I was here. He copied a Stradivarius to make this copy, this Villon. It's funny to say this is a copy of a Stradivarius. It's a Villon worth almost $400,000. But the instrument that he copied it after was the Russian Stradivarius, also called the Siberian Stradivarius, which was Henry Ford's instrument. It's in the Henry Ford Museum in Detroit.
Oh, in Detroit.
Yes, and it looks exactly like this instrument, one piece back, everything. And I did the research, and he had these two. He had the Russian Stradivarius at the time that he was making this violin, so he's copying it. Yeah, and I got to play on the Russian Stradivarius. I should mention that. It's a $4.7 million violin. The upper register was more beautiful and even more silky sounding than my violin, but the lower register was starting to give out because no one's playing the instruments, and the violins really need to be played. If anybody has a fine violin sitting underneath your bed, I'm your guy. Take it off your head. No, I'll get this track going. Yeah, there are tracks. It's not just the violin doing it all.
Well, and is the track you, or is it something?
This track was sent to me by a producer about 2 weeks ago. His name's Ugly Fingers.
Wow. Well, he sounds pretty legit.
Yeah, that's who you want to be working
Yeah.
with. He has some good connections out in Los Angeles, and actually another producer connected me with him because he makes beats. He made some beats for Janet Jackson. He won a couple Grammy Awards.
Ugly Fingers did.
Yeah, the Ugly
Oh.
Fingers.
That's very cool. I didn't catch that.
Ugly Fingers is winning Grammy Awards. I want to win a Grammy.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I don't know.
Push play? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
maybe just put the
Ready?
mic by it, yeah.
You got it.
Oh, I had it turned down, sorry. So let me just start it over so that we can get a fresh. Okay, that's not gonna sound bad.
There we go.
There we go.
Thanks, hope you all enjoyed. That's actually the first time I've played that for anybody. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's some stuff in there.
Okay.
So after playing stuff like that, what's it like to go back and play Vivaldi? Is it bring something different out of Vivaldi, or?
You know, I learn from Vivaldi. I learn from everyone. As I said, influence.
Yeah.
You can't help but be influenced by whoever you studied from. Everybody is in the music that I'm playing, in this classical hip-hop music. There's Paganini, there's Wieniawski, there's techniques by all the great violinists, composers from the past. I have to use it, otherwise I'd have nothing.
Yeah.
But going back to Vivaldi, I constantly think of like, how did Vivaldi make those the birds chirping and the solos of the spring sound so amazing? Can I apply that to something in this? I constantly think of that. Yes, I can. Use the triplet 16th notes in the same format, just change a couple of the notes, change a couple of the harmonies. people think, oh, you're brilliant. It's actually Vivaldi. But you change a couple things around here and there and you got something new. I realized that with the Michael Jackson song the other day as well. It's like, oh, well, let me just change, let me not go that way with the notes, I'll go this way. And I have a hit song.
That's so funny. I'm so glad you mentioned that because I will never forget the time you played, and I actually think this was maybe in Cheyenne. We've worked together other places too. But what is that one? We used to play variations
Smooth
on that.
Criminal.
Smooth Criminal. That was it. Did you
Yes.
used to play that?
I
don't know
forgot
if they've
it.
ever this was unbelievable. I heard him do something when I was in Wyoming with Gareth, and I don't know if he's ever played that here. Maybe you did. You were practicing something,
yeah, I think
and there's a story about how you were having to practice that technique.
Yeah, I forgot.
You had a great story too. I remember you saying like you had to practice this technique, and then you realized it was the same thing as Smooth Criminal.
Yeah, right,
And you were
right.
like, oh, that's cool. Wow. Well, we're so excited. I hope that this whole hip hop violin really takes off for you.
I hope
Yeah.
so. So I'm gonna take it to America's Got Talent too.
Are you serious? Wow.
Give
That's
that a
fantastic.
shot.
Oh, great. We will all tune in.
Yes.
Oh, he's.
I'm gonna take it to America's Got Talent. That's why I'm trying to get these tracks done. In December it starts again, so I'm gonna try to be ready for it this year. Thank you.
It was thrilling to be right next to you while you were doing that. Wow. Anything else you want to share about what's been going on? Anything else about the Vivaldi? When you play Vivaldi, are you focused on like the technical aspects of it, or do you ever try to think about
I
like
don't-
birds and storms and
I'm-
all the stuff that we're depicting?
Yes, whenever I play the Vivaldi, I'll be 100% honest with you. I don't think about the technique or playing the piece at all. It's like I just have stepped through a portal and I'm in another place when I play Vivaldi at this point, which is quite a magical feeling. It takes a while to get there, I feel, as a musician, but it can be cold, it can be gray like this outside, but whenever I start the spring, it's a blue sky, birds are chirping. It's like I'm in a new place, and I hope that you all feel the same way about this music. I'm pretty sure that you will, because the orchestra's sounding fantastic. They molded and went right along with any interpretation I was doing last night. So I'm so excited to play it again tonight and the next 2 days. But yeah, it's really like stepping through a portal for me at this point. And as you said, I think I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've always had a certain level of musicianship, even as a kid. I had it. And I was always trying to feel the music and understand the music much more than my students do today. It's like they just come in playing notes and, what are you thinking about when you play that? Nothing. I get so many nothing answers. But now I feel that I've really reached a different level as a musician. I am the music. I really feel like I am the music, and there's no longer any worry when I'm on stage as well, like there were in my younger days, because in the younger days it was always, man, I better do a good job. They'll never have me back again. That's the end of my career. If I miss one note, that's the end of all of this. All the work that I've done is useless. That's kind of what you have to imagine, because classical musicians are perfectionists.
Yeah.
You
There's
listen
no
to
room for error.
Yeah, you listen to a lot of these great recordings. There aren't mistakes in them.
Yeah. Well, that's partially what makes you special, though, too, is that you give so much. You feel the music, like what you said,
Yes,
and you give so much of yourself.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
but through reaching this plateau, I feel, now I don't get that worry anymore. The mistake, who cares about mistakes? Even if there is a mistake, we're human, and it's more about feeling the message and getting the message across. If you all step through that portal with me, you won't care about a mistake. It's all about traveling together. My mom used to tell me, you have to serve as a vehicle to translate what these composers were feeling. That's all I really am. I'm just translating what these composers were feeling to you. We're translators. Okay? And now I feel a lot more comfortable that I'm going to get that message across to you clearly. And that's with anything that I play. I look forward to coming back and playing for you all more. Absolutely. So, but yes, and just so you know, classical music, that's my base, that's my root. That's what I am, a classical musician. Absolutely. The hip hop thing, yes, I have to make a living, everyone does. And I also want my name to be mentioned in the future too. Oh, this guy did this, he was the first to do this. As opposed to, if I just teach, perform, the years go by and nothing's left behind from Gareth.
Right.
So I hope to leave behind a little legacy from Gareth.
Well, it's fantastic having you back. It's great
Thank
to
you.
see.
Really a
your
pleasure. Thank you all.
growth. I know we're out of time, but if you have to go, that's totally fine. But if any of you have some questions for Gareth? Okay. Maybe not. Oh, yeah, we do have a question.
Tell me about your younger years. You said you grew up in St. Louis, and how
Yes.
did you start to have the opportunity to go and play music or something?
Oh, well, I won the Sphinx violin competition.
That's how I first
That's
got
actually
there.
how William found me, yes. It's an international competition in Detroit, Michigan for Black and Latino string players. And it just really gets you all out around the world. The prizes for winning the competition are just incredible. You get to play with all the major symphony orchestras. And if you form relationships, you get to go back to them. So that was kind of my early life, to form those relationships and keep a career going, as well as getting my education. But now I've started a family and I'm kind of moving along.
How old were you when you won that award?
I was 15 when I won, or 16 when I won the junior division, and I was 25 when I won the senior division. Yes.
Fantastic. Another question over here.
With that incredibly valuable violin, how do you navigate airport security?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had to tell them not to break it yesterday. Be careful, please.
Do they open it up?
No, they didn't. They don't open it. And yes,
But you put it through the X-ray.
Yeah, I had to put it through the X-ray. Just so rough. This guy just dragging it yesterday. And I immediately went and opened it and checked it. And they're like, "Oh, sorry, sir." I'm like, yeah, I've got a $500,000 violin here. You're dragging across the bars.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So it's not always good.
So if when you return next time, what would you like to play?
I'd like to play, even though I shouldn't be messing around with it, the Brahms violin.
You were going to say Brown.
No, because my dad has to hear me play that. He always says, I gotta hear you play that before I die. And he hasn't heard me play that one. He's heard Beethoven, Tchaikovsky, Mendelssohn, Sibelius, all his favorite majors. But he has to hear Brahms still. Always.
Do you come from a musical family?
Yes, my mom's a doctor of music education, and so are her two sisters.
Oh.
They used to really ream me. That's how I learned to play, really.
Your mom really taught you a lot about like what music's really about.
Oh,
I
yes.
remember that.
Oh,
She's
yeah.
a lovely lady, and his parents are coming back for the concert. They were
Yes.
at
Yes, yeah, they're at the Hotel Julian now. And it was great because my mom was a pianist. And if you think about it, all of these great musicians, they had that parent musician by them at the piano or organ, whether it was Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. Yeah, they all had a parent musician. And I just really feel that that rubs off because you hear that piano constantly playing in tune. My mom would sit and practice with me 2-3 hours a day.
Wow.
And that's incredible. I was putting in my 4 or 5 hours sometimes, but for the mother to be dedicated enough, she'd burn food. We were practicing and she'd just forget it. Get that note right, and the food's in there burning. But yeah, it's quite a life coming up as an artist. I'm just happy to be able to share it with someone, so thank you all for taking me in.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you to the league for hosting these at that time. We'll see you this weekend.